just say, here's some of what happens in me, and I don't know if it's happening to anybody else on the call right now. We're going to open it up to questions. And because I work with victims, and because I work with, I work in the Michigan Human Trafficking Task Force. So we are a victim-centered, evidence-based, trauma-informed community of 137 agencies who are seeking to not only inform and train, but then create wraparound services for survivors, for victims, for survivors. And when I hear about somebody who's working with the population that has created the pain that I work with, I'm brought back to something that Jim Martin from International Justice Mission said. Somebody said, hey, what does IJM do for the perpetrators? You guys are doing all this stuff for survivors of human trafficking, rescuing victims of human trafficking. What are you doing with the perpetrators? Because they're broken people too. And Jim said, that's not our job, but that's a really good job for someone to take on. But that's not our job. So even when I listen to you, you know, I know that there's a part of me that is armored up and angry at those that have inflicted violence on the people that I'm working with. And so I feel a little bit, you know, I feel a little disoriented at the moment, even in attempting to open up compassionately for those that have inflicted the violence on the people that I work with. How would you talk to someone like me? You know, if 1 in 3 females is violated before, you know, the age of 18, and 1 in 6 males, whatever the percentages are, how do you work with those of us who are aware of the pain of victims in developing compassion for those that have been the violent people, even though they were also in pain as children? How do you help someone like me?
Well, first of all, I want to just really acknowledge that it's such a courageous question, and that shows me a lot about you, that you have the internal holding to be able to be that vulnerable. And I think that you speak for a lot of people that don't have the courage to ask me that question, so I'm happy you did. And I would say that hurting people hurt people. And the thing I know to be true is that, and I know this because one of the really key assignments that we give to our students in our 8-module program, and sometimes that's 8 weeks, sometimes 10, 12, or 20 weeks, depends on the institution, is to write a biography in the third person. And we know this assignment because it comes right out of the Wisdom of the Enneagram book, which is our text of choice. And when people write about their early childhood, we give them prompts, and some of them we've learned from Bessel van der Kolk, whose work we already talked about. And we sort of like an intake of, you know, what happened to you when you were growing up? Who did the laundry, and who took you to school? Who tucked you in at night? Who showed up to your games? How was trauma handled? How did people handle really big, difficult experiences? Did anyone die? Did someone go to prison? We ask all these kinds of questions. They don't have to answer everything, but we invite them. And sometimes people turn in 20 and 30 and even 50 pages handwritten in their biographies, because they finally see this is a place to be seen. This is a place to be heard. And this is where I mentioned you can't think up the things that people share. And I have one student and he's been in for nearly 30, well, just a little over 30 years. And he's a type 9. And he shared in his biography that his mother was a prostitute, and she was mostly on drugs. And she would turn tricks in front of him in the house. And there were people in and out. It was like it was just a lot of sex trafficking going on all over the place. And this was his childhood. When she was on drugs, she would beat him with electrical cords, and he remembers hiding under the bed. And the last words that he remembers from her were when she said to a social worker, "Take him." And that was the last time he saw his mom. So I know for a type 9, I have a type 9 son, that the nines come to teach the rest of us about being. And the sense that we have for type 9 is that, and I got this really from a guide of ours named Ariane, I just love, that when you sit next to a 9, there's this sense that they don't want anything from you, and that they're just really like, they're okay to be your companion next to you. And nines have a sensibility of respecting that in other people as well. And that's why nines are so good at knowing, like, how are people including themselves, and how are people making sure that how is it that everybody belongs. And very awake nines will be very present to how they can use this capacity to diplomatically include and bring more people around. They have such a sensibility about that. That's why nines are quiet. That's why nine seems withdrawn, and they do withdraw to be able to like regulate and like make room for this extraordinary capacity to feel the others. And I know that. And it took me a long time to get that in my body. I didn't know that when I set foot in prison. I knew like sloth, defense mechanism, like I just had a list of characteristics. I didn't really get the essence of the 9. But I do through my son and through the other 9s that I know and love. So when I think about a little 9 being that way, and I think about what must it have felt like to be that abused, for the beginning of my life to be the recipient of so much rage and toxicity, and what must his mom have been through in order to do that to her son? What must have happened to her? It is like, it's devastating, and it's so sad. And often I read these biographies with a cup of tea and just crying, right? And I can't read them all at once sometimes. This biography is just the one that's coming up to me as I'm listening to you. And so when I hear what you're saying, you're experiencing people on the other side of that child who then grew up and acted out his rage at his life on, hello, other women, because mother hatred is real. And he had that issue. And the brain that was forming, like, um, neglect, just neglect, and not even talking about abuse, is when the brain doesn't get what the brain is expecting. Mm-hmm. And abuse means that those receptors in our brain, they shut down. Like, we literally don't develop the neural pathways. We need to have a healthy brain, so that the front of our brain, so that we can regulate ourselves, so that we can stay connected, so that we can have consciousness. Those things, it's not to excuse the act that he later did. It's to understand that the thing that he needed, that he deserved to be able to be a high functioning person, didn't happen for him. So later, when he murdered and raped a woman, that it makes sense to me. It's not that I'm excusing it, but it's logical. It's actually like a recipe when we see what happened to children. And I think, I'm not great at the exact quote, but Gabor Mate, whose work we also really adore, says, like, we're very quick to have compassion for children, but we forget that the adult standing in front of us was once a child who had these things that were in their experience as well. So I think that it's really important always to come back to these questions, and to recognize that this echo of something good is sometimes a very distant echo. And it would be really hard to kind of connect those dots up. So I think that it's a long answer, Claire, to your question. The most important thing is acceptance, and the acceptance of, can I just accept myself for this part of me that feels no acceptance of the people that you're talking about? Like, can you be compassionate to that part? Because one of my favorite authors is Sherry Uber, and I know Sherry knows. I don't know her personally. I've never met her. But I know she knows the Enneagram, but her books are not about the Enneagram, but they are. And right now our men in San Quentin are reading this book, There's Nothing Wrong with You. And in it, she says, in her cute font with her little pictures, everything outside of us is an aspect of ourselves. And when I first heard that, I was like, whoa. And I really started to think about that. And then the next line she writes, everything. And so I know that the part of me that is unwilling to accept somebody in front of me is really just my own reflection. And is much easier to hate someone for not changing or not being what I want them to be than to recognize that I am not willing to be that inside of myself. And the lack of compassion I have for somebody is a reflection. So that's that little phrase has given me more traction than anything else I've read in the last number of years, because it's kind of hard to get away from that truth. And that's the inroad to being compassionately culpable.
Yeah. Will you say the phrase one more time?
Everything outside of ourselves is an aspect of ourselves. Everything.